If and when should you add standards to your teachers pay teachers products? You may think it sounds like a good idea to always add them, but there are certain situations I think you need to either not add them or be very careful about adding them. Hello everyone, my name is Sherry from Rolling Acres Education. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if this is not your first time. And this video is prompted by an incident I had that it was not bad, and I want to say straight up, I am not criticizing the person who left me the review. They actually gave me a 4-star review, which is totally fine, but they did get me thinking about something. And so while it sounds like, you know what, I should always try to add standards to my resources because it'll help me be found, because some teachers do search by standard. I've searched by standard before, but you have to make sure that the teacher is also going to feel like your standard is connected, the standard is connected to your resource. And let me just tell you what happened to explain this a little better. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the next generation science standards, I'm just going to tell you they're very hands-on, okay? They're not like list, blah, 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 explain, blah, blah, blah. They are like develop a model, create a hands-on experiment, design an experiment. They're very doey, like you're supposed to do something with your hands or make some kind of model or something to that effect. So I'm going to read you the standard that I attached to my product. No, I'm not. I'm going to read you part of the standard because it's really long. But it starts out, develop and use a model to describe why structural changes to genes, which are mutations, structural changes are mutations, located on the chromosome may affect proteins, blah, 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 blah. Now, my resource was an independent work packet. That's what I do, and so I don't ever put things in there that are really complicated, that are going to need a lot of explanation, because my goal is the teacher is going to have to work with the students as little as possible. And so mine was very vocabulary based. But it went over the vocabulary in several ways. There was a passage with the vocabulary. There was, a worksheet. There was a crossword puzzle. And the vocabulary was used over and over again, so that by the time the student got to the end of that product, they should have had a pretty good idea of what the vocabulary words meant. Now, can you develop and use a model to describe why structural changes to genes, blah, 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 without knowing what structural changes are, what mutations are? Some students don't even really understand what a structure is, what a chromosome, what proteins are, okay? Can you do that without understanding all that? Well, of course you can't, but if you're not really teaching the student about using models to describe this, are you doing what the standard says? So it's kind of how you look at it. And so the teacher left, the buyer left me a 4-star review, but did say that they didn't feel like the standard was very well attached to the product, or the product was very well attached to the standard. And at first I was kind of like, but then I started thinking, well, I guess it just depends on how you look at it. No, I didn't really do anything that was in that standard other than giving the students the vocabulary they needed to understand what it was they're supposed to do. So what is my suggestion? Well, I have 3 choices. I can either just not attach a standard to that resource, and that's what I decided to do from now on, is because I do independent work packets, seasonal resources, things like that. Teachers don't usually find me through standards. They usually find me through just a general search, and so not having standards really is not going to affect me. So as of now, I really don't attach standards to my resources. Now, if I made like language arts and the standard was a little less hands-on-y kind of word, excuse my words there, then maybe I might. But for science, I just decided, you know what, I'm just not going to attach a standard, because they're usually searching by subplans or something like that. So I just don't attach standards. My second would be to go ahead and attach it. And, I've sold, I forget how many of those, and I've only had one teacher say they didn't think it was really aligned. Aligned, that's what I was looking for. They didn't think it was really aligned. So I could just take my chances and say, Now, she could have said, gave me a 1, because she could have said, I was looking for someone that really taught this standard, and I just don't feel like your resource teaches this standard. Fortunately, she didn't do that, but she could have. And we don't want to give people a legitimate reason. I mean, I think that would be very extreme for her to do that, for a reviewer to do that. But on the other hand, there is some legitimacy to that. So we don't want to give people a legitimate reason to give us a bad review, even if we think it's a little extreme. So I could just do that. I could just take my chances and say, you know what, I've had one out of however many teachers say they didn't think it was aligned, so I'm just going to not worry about it. Or I would do number 1, or I would do number 3, and that is to add a disclaimer in your description and be very clear about how your standard is aligned to, your product is aligned to the standard. And maybe other standards, it isn't so big a deal. Now, I can see some math standards that this could happen also, but I'm not real familiar with the social studies or language arts standards, so I don't know, but I'm just saying it might not hurt to add in this disclaimer and saying, my product, while not actually teaching students how to develop a model, does give the essential, the foundational, use somewhere like that, vocabulary that they will need to be able to complete this standard. If I really wanted to attach a standard to that resource I have, that's what I would do. I would attach that resource, and then I would, in the description, say what I just said. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. I just want to tell you, if you are attaching standards, which is a good idea, if you're teaching a curriculum that's based on the standards, then you want to attach a standard. So I'm not, in no way, shape, or form am I saying don't attach standards. I'm saying make sure when you attach a standard that your product is aligned. And even if it's weakly aligned, I think you can still do it, but just add a disclaimer of how you think this will help your teacher teach that concept or standard. So I hope this was helpful. I just want to give you a heads up on that, because I didn't really, to me it makes total sense. You can't do this if you don't know the vocabulary. So it's definitely aligned, but on the other hand, but the standard says to develop a model and describing all this, and there was no modeling and no describing in my resource. So I can see both sides of the issue. So if you're going to add standards, make sure they're very much aligned. If they're, kind of aligned, but not like directly what the standard says, then just add a little disclaimer and say, look, this is how my product is aligned to the standards, so they know what they're getting. Just remember, you've got this, God's got you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.